This week on Painting Lines.
I'm pretty confident in Runa. I think there's too much low-hanging fruit for improvement. I believe in his desire, his work ethic. I watch him play, and I think, wow, he could be so much better. Grigor Dimitrov was an absolute machine. You can count the bad losses that he's had on his season on one hand.
Welcome to the Painting Lines podcast, your one-stop shop for all things tennis. Join Erik and Aidan in their discussion for updates on news and pop culture, and from hot takes to betting, they've got you covered.
Ready? Play.
Welcome back to Painting Lines. Last week we gave our season awards for 2023, and this week we're excited to welcome Gill, a fellow tennis content creator and commentator. Gill, welcome to the show.
Hey, Aidan. Thank you so much for having me on. Excited.
Glad to have you. So I wanted to kind of start the pod off by kind of delving into your background in tennis and in broadcasting, and then sort of move into some topics about this year and going into 2024, what your thoughts are on the year to come. So first up, I think probably you've had this question a lot in anytime you've been asked about your background, but you were a ball boy at the US Open. I kind of wanted to ask, what was that like? And was there like a favorite match that you were a part of when you were at the US Open?
Yeah, it was a dream. Just trying out when I think I was at the age minimum. I was about 13 years old when I first tried out. I was smaller than everybody else. There was a line of 400 people trying to make it and become a ball person. And I think the math was like 80. They take like 80 new ones every year, and like 400 people try out. So I'm thinking there's no way I'm going to get to do this. But I did make it, and I kind of consider those 3 weeks in 2013, which was the first year I did it. I kind of consider that like the best 3 weeks of my life, where I was just living in complete fantasy land, going to the US Open every day, you know, getting paid instead of paying.
Yeah.
And being on court with these players, where like even in qualifying week, you're just blown away by the athleticism and the level of tennis that they're bringing. And, you know, at that age, there was nothing cooler than that. Favorite match? Well, as a rookie, I got on Grandstand. It was the old Grandstand before they changed it. So the one attached to Louis Armstrong Stadium at the time. And I did Tommy Haas.
Oh, wow.
So that was the biggest court I did. And one of the things I really remember from that match was Tommy was cursing in German and English within the same sentence. So he would just change languages like mid-sentence, and it sounded hilarious. And the last thing you wanted to do was like crack a smile, right? Like you didn't want to look like you were laughing at Tommy Haas.
She's like, you think this is funny?
Yeah, exactly.
Ball boys are able to keep like such composure too. You have to keep a straight face, right?
Yeah. And one of the things that people don't think about, like you don't really talk for 2 hours, 15 minutes. Like you don't say a word while you're doing it. So it's just you and your thoughts really, because, you know, there's really no place for talking on court. I'll also add, I did the Bryan Bros.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah. And that was on court 7, which is way too small a court for the Bryan Bros. There's a massive line outside the court trying to watch them because it just wasn't big enough. But I always like to say that the Bryan Bros were the nicest players that I ever was on court with. They were the only ones that actually said thank you every time. Every time I gave them a ball, they'd say thank you, which is not expected. Like I don't expect any players to thank me, right, at all. But the fact that they did it, and they're the Bryan Bros, and not a single one of the juniors or the qualifiers, like none of even the smaller players, none of them thanked me, only the Bryan Bros. I thought that was pretty cool.
Yeah, humility at the highest level.
What about towels? Were you in charge of the towels too, or no, when they did that?
Yeah, at times, especially my sophomore year, because most players bring the towel to the side opposite the chair umpire. No, I'm sorry, same side of the chair umpire. The veterans of the crew usually work that side of the court. The rookies work usually the other side of the court. So when they throw the ball across the court, or at least when they used to, because you don't throw the ball at the US Open anymore. When you throw the ball across the court, you don't have to deal with the chair, trying to avoid hitting the chair, which is something that I was guilty of one time, my second year. But yeah, I did the towel a little bit. I didn't think it was gross. I never minded it. If anything, it's gross for them, right? Like the dirtiest part of our human bodies are our hands. And we are handing them towels to put on their face. So who is it gross for, us or the players?
Yeah.
Hey, good point. There you go. Can you kind of talk about the tryout to becoming a ball kid or ball person? Because there was a great Vice documentary on the process and it seemed super cutthroat. They put you through drills all day. They're kind of like yelling at you too. They put you in high pressure situations. People trip, fall, get up. Like just speak a little bit about that.
Yeah, I mean, I don't remember any yelling, but it's definitely an intimidating scene. You know, you have a lot of people at once, and there's really no way to stand out other than don't mess up, right? I think that's the key when you're trying out. People would be surprised, like how few people 10 times in a row without fail can run full speed and pick a ball up off the court and, continue to run full speed and do it 10 times without butchering it. Like a lot of people just don't have that dexterity or that coordination to do that, where it seems like a simple thing, but the key is that you can do it every time. Now, back when I was trying out, another thing was the throw. The throw was pretty hard because if you've ever thrown a tennis ball, they're just not designed to be thrown. They're too lightweight. So, you have to be able to throw that accurately and on one bounce to the other side of the court. And that's something that I'm sure a lot of people got tripped up with.
Yeah. I was a ball kid at a challenger in my hometown in Napa, and they only did the roll across the court. Like you rolled it to the person in the middle and then you rolled it down to the person at the end. But I mean, speaking on what you were saying with the running full speed, another aspect of that is you have to be aware of the players at all times. Because I remember I was doing the net and I was kind of in the mode. I was just every time I would just run, pick up the ball. And this one time the player hit it in the net and then they walked towards the ball because they were going to hit it. And as I'm getting to the ball, I pick it up and I'm still going full speed and I had to like dodge around the player. And it was Sam Groth, who was like a big deal at the tournament because he's like the fastest server of all time. And
Yeah.
so I was like, I almost just took that dude out. That would not have been a good look. But yeah, it's definitely important to maintain the focus, and it's not an easy thing to be doing.
True. And the score too. Like if you're kind of asleep at the wheel and let's say a game ends and it's time for a changeover and you're just like frozen there for like 4 seconds while everyone else is going through the changeover procedures, that's a bad look. Like you
Yeah.
gotta be on it.
Exactly. Were there any cool things you saw that like behind the scenes in those 3 weeks?
Honestly, they do a pretty good job keeping like the players' areas and the ball person's
Mm.
areas separate. It might be cooler now because the ball person lounge has been updated since I did
Mm.
it. And it's actually under Armstrong, where I think the players have a little bit more like facilities, like dining areas, like a little bit more. So maybe there's more interaction now. It's always interesting to see the players though before they go out onto a match or just walking around on the grounds. Now that you ask, what stands out to me is it used to be that the Saturday before the tournament started, that would be the day where we would go pick up our uniforms. And this has changed now. Fans were not allowed on the grounds at this point. So it was just players and coaches. And I remember kind of walking around and just seeing a lot of players with their coaches. Just it's their only chance to really like enjoy the grounds without having fans everywhere, right? Which
Yeah.
they'll never do it once the tournament starts. But they're just kind of lounging around. And one of the things I just remembered was how many different languages I was hearing. And you start to realize like the tennis tour is like so diverse. You're hearing French and you're hearing Italian and you're hearing Spanish all in a span of like 2 minutes walking from one part to the other. So that part I remember pretty well.
Yeah, that's crazy. Yeah, people don't, I think about, because all these guys speak English on TV, but they're all speaking to their coaches and their team in their native language.
Right.
Well, that's awesome. So then you, as you got a little bit older, you started your YouTube channel and podcast. I know you worked on a radio station for a little bit as well, but for us, it's felt a little bit odd, at least, yeah, for me. It often feels kind of like I'm speaking into the void, and then I get a comment and I realize people are actually seeing like what I put out. I remember the other day I made an Instagram video and it was about Medvedev playing in the next gen finals. And then his coach or his former coach made a comment on it. And I was like, this is crazy. I didn't expect someone like that to see it. So is there ever been a time where you put something out and you were like, oh, I can't believe people are actually seeing this, or you realize like people are reacting to what you're saying?
Yeah, I just remember the first couple times videos got like, I don't know, some SEO help, I'll call it, which for those uninitiated, search engine optimization, basically the YouTube algorithm, just giving you a little bit of help and recommending your video. And, you're going to need that to happen at some point if you want anybody to find your stuff. And I remember, first year of the YouTube channel, I was covering all sports. I was doing videos on UFC. I was talking about the Knicks and the Rangers, who were my New York teams that I liked. And the tennis videos were the first to really get some traction. And I think the first one that ever got some traction was Federer and Nadal after their Australian Open final in 2017.
Great match.
And yeah, I mean, amazing match. I'm sure, it did a crazy amount of traffic everywhere. There wasn't a lot of tennis commentary on YouTube at the time. So I guess it filled a little bit of a void. And then I just kind of noticed as I continued to periodically do some tennis videos, as it was in the rotation of sports that I was interested in, that those videos tended to get more SEO help. And not only that, I am more, just a little bit more insightful about the technicalities of tennis than I am compared to other sports. Although, I've listened to a lot of smart people about basketball. I was a manager on my high school varsity team in basketball, in part so I could be in practice and I could learn more about the game, so I could have more knowledge. And football, I think everybody tries their best, but it's so darn complicated. But tennis was my main sport that I played. And, I think I had really smart coaches, and I even did some coaching myself. So it kind of was a combination of two things. On one hand, it was completely lucky that YouTube algorithm was kind of giving me more help in tennis than the other sports. The other part of it was that what I was saying was probably some more valuable commentary than I could give on the other sports, just because I could get a little bit more technical with tennis.
Yeah. Did you notice any sort of crossover with basketball? Because I know a lot of people say basketball and tennis have a lot of similar like movements and characteristics. Was there anything, because obviously you have experience then, like being a manager on a team like that. Did you notice anything specific between those two sports?
I'm not sure. I can't, nothing comes to my head immediately. The thing about also the tennis viewership is it's so international. Now, basketball is really gaining popularity worldwide, but it's funny when I'm doing the show now and I try to cross-reference other sports, and it's like some land, some don't. I do find that basketball is one that does land, certainly more often than baseball. Like if I make a baseball analogy, I feel like a lot of people are pretty lost.
Yeah.
And basketball tends to work, especially now that, it's funny, in Serbia, the top two athletes are Jokic and Djokovic. So I think there's a lot of people in Serbia who are certainly locked into tennis and basketball as their main two sports, even though throughout most of that region, as is the case in 95% of the world, soccer is kind of king.
Yeah. You get that growing viewership in the NBA when you see people like Doncic and Jokic just kind of dominating the league.
I kind of have a question on like the viewership. We talked about how international tennis is. Do you find that most of your engagement comes from people outside the US?
Yeah, more than 50%. I mean, the US is my largest viewership country by quite a bit. Like nothing really stacks up to it. But even with it being my largest viewership country, it's still well under 50%. So yeah, it's insane. And that's another moment I remember when I was looking at the stats for some of the earliest tennis videos I was doing. I was like, holy crap, this was viewed in 150 countries. I didn't know there were 150 countries existed.
Yeah. Yeah, that's wild. But another thing on basketball and tennis, in college, Is it right that you were a commentator for men's basketball and tennis at Syracuse?
Yeah, for separate entities.
Oh, okay.
That's kind of the typical thing you do. When you go to Syracuse to try to be a sports broadcaster, there are a lot of different student organizations that there are to get involved in. And kind of the famous one, it's been around forever. Marv Albert worked at this station. Mike Tirico worked at this station. Bob Costas, like pretty much anyone who went through Syracuse. And that's WAER. And WAER is the radio station for men's basketball and football and men's lacrosse. And so I did that on the radio. For tennis, that was something that launched really only 3-4 years before I got to Syracuse, which is actually maybe only 2, which is ACC Network Extra. So, that's just the ACC partnering with ESPN. And, when ESPN launched ESPN Plus, they wanted, to incentivize people to subscribe. And ACC Network Extra was something that I think you had to have an ESPN Plus membership to access it. But Olympic sports at Syracuse, whether it be field hockey or volleyball, or in my case, tennis, that all went on ACC Network Extra. We were one of the only schools in the country at the time to broadcast tennis. And, it was multicam broadcasts. We were remote. We weren't on the site, but yeah, I mean, the technology that they had to invest in to make it so that the tennis facility, which was like a 10-minute drive away from the control room, was wired up into the control room, was pretty remarkable. So it was just one of those things where, you kind of are thankful that you went to Syracuse, and one of those opportunities that, that you basically wouldn't have gotten if you went to any other school in the country. And that definitely helped me getting the Tennis Channel job, because I was able to make a demo reel with live tennis commentary out of college. And how many people actually have that out of college? Probably not a lot.
Yeah. And I mean, speaking on tennis commentary, basketball versus tennis, I think, is probably very different, because in basketball's constant movement, it seems like it would almost be a little bit more of announcing just what's going on in the game, versus tennis. You have to be able to come up with things to say on the spot. Did you notice that it was a more of generation of ideas about the sport in tennis versus basketball, where it might be more play by play?
Yeah, it's totally different. As you said, if I'm doing a basketball game and I'm doing play-by-play, I am calling action, and it's about descriptions and verbs. And if it's the radio, then it's court geography, and it's time and score, and, accentuating big moments as they happen. And, tennis, you shut up while the point is being played. You should not speak while that is happening. And it's about finding, how do I add to the viewer's experience by what you say, or sometimes what you don't say, in between points. And if you have an analyst, normally, a former pro, if you're at a place like Tennis Channel, always a former pro if you're at a place like Tennis Channel, it's how do we get the most out of them? So yeah, it's a very, very different job.
Yeah.
So as a follow-up to that, did you have any tennis commentators that you would look up to and kind of try to replicate what they would do? McEnroe comes to mind because I just love hearing him call games.
Yeah, but for me, that would be a pretty bad guy to try to replicate, right? Because first of all, John McEnroe is an analyst, and I will never be an analyst because I was not a pro. So I would have to kind of look more towards the play-by-players. Ted Robinson is one who, real legend, who just has a great feel for matches in terms of how much to say, how much not to say, and, a really friendly conversational tone to the way he calls matches as well. I look at someone like Jason Goodall, and there's been opportunity to take certain things from him, but it's really about grabbing bits and pieces, I think, and trying to find your own voice. You don't want to, and everybody does this as a young broadcaster, and I've certainly done this a lot, and I think especially when I do non-tennis sports, I'm still in this phase, but you try not to do an impersonation of your favorite broadcasters and try to become your own broadcaster. It's hard. It takes time, but you get there eventually, hopefully.
Yeah. Speaking on being on the Tennis Channel this year, I know you were commentating on the U.S. Open radio. What was that experience like? I mean, obviously, it's like the biggest stage to be commentating on. What was your experience like there? And was there a certain match that stood out that you happened to call in the tournament?
Yeah. So to be clear, that's not Tennis Channel related.
Oh,
That's for
okay.
the U.S. Open. It's unbelievable. I mean, it's my favorite, and like no shade to all of the great weeks I have at Tennis Channel. Call matches in Santa Monica, but that's my favorite 10 days out of the year. Just being on site at the tournament that I grew up with. I grew up in Westchester, New York, so I go into the U.S. Open. That was kind of my experience with live tennis. And my job's pretty cool. Basically, the radio broadcast focuses on one match at a time mainly. So the play-by-player and the analyst will really be focusing on that match for the vast majority of things. But as we know at a major tournament, there's so much going on the other courts that my job, at least one of them, is to keep people updated on what's happening on these other courts. So they'll go to me and I'll be over on grandstand, and the main broadcast has been focused on Ash. And, my job might be to say, well, look, Tiafoe got the break here in the second set, and now I'm trying to add color and information, whether it be how it happened, why the match is important for Francis, whether or not the draw has opened up in this part of the draw, so it's a big opportunity. Whatever is kind of important or whatever can add color to the situation. And then the other thing I do, which is also, something that I really cherish, is the ability to interview players after the matches. So that's another thing that I get to do at US Open Radio, which is really, really fun. And it's such a great team, working with on air and off air with just a lot of great people. And it starts to become this once a year thing where even though like you haven't seen a lot of these people in a year, it feels like you saw them yesterday. You pick up right where you left off. And I just love going to the US Open every year and working for US Open Radio.
That sounds incredible. Yeah, I mean, that's a critical part of the broadcast that you add there, because if you just focus on the one match, people are going to be on their phone or something trying to find out about other matches. But you being able to add all this cool color commentary from these additional matches sounds like an excellent thing to be bringing to the broadcast.
Yeah, I mean, that's what a major is about, right? Especially during the first week. Like, the fun in a major is that there's 7 matches going on at once that you might be somewhat interested in to varying degrees. And we're just trying to capture the essence of that on radio, just through audio. So, that's where me and my counterparts come in.
Yeah, especially in like the first couple of days, you're at the grounds and you go, oh, what matches are going on? Oh, over on court 17, this match is going on and it's in 5th set or something like that, and you can run over there and watch the end of that one and then jump back and go over to another match and kind of get that experience, like you're saying.
Yep.
Can you talk about the preparation that goes into the matches that you call? Because I feel like there's a lot of due diligence you need to do, and then there's also a lot of in the moment kind of on the fly stuff as well. So just talk about the balance there.
Yeah, that's a great question. So if I'm going to do a match on Tennis Channel, generally I have an idea of when I'm going to start my shift, my work shift. And if it's at the start of play, then I know exactly, I sometimes know exactly which match I'm going to be on. And I'm going to be with that match for, potentially 2.5 hours of time, sometimes more. So that is where the night before I'm doing a lot of homework, a lot of studying up and notes and all that, so that I'm prepared to do something, that I'm prepared to call that match. And then I also need to know a little bit about other matches that we might pop in on in a 2-box or something like that. But for US Open Radio, there's basically no prep. It would be impossible. My prep is the knowledge that I obtain by covering the sport throughout the year. The reason there's no prep for US Open Radio is because my on-air shift is, from 3 p.m. till the end of play every day. And, I might see 15 matches on a given day, every day. It's a 10-hour day. There's no time, there's just no time to prep, and there's too much to prep. It would be impossible. So it's literally, a lot of it is what I'm seeing and communicating what I'm seeing, using my background knowledge, staying on top of the main storylines for the tournament in general, certainly. And then if you need to know something, I do have my phone in my pocket to find out whatever I need to find out, especially because I'm not on air constantly. They're going to me every, 10, 15, 20 minutes for these hits. So I do have that time in between to gather information if need be.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's got some good insight.
Especially when you're on the radio, you could be looking at your phone while you're broadcasting.
That's true. That is true.
But yeah, I mean, thank you for that great insight into your background and your experience. So I kind of wanted to transition from there and talk about the 2023 season. And as we look into 2024, like what your opinion is on a few things, because I think it's great to hear other opinions. We don't want to be in an echo
chamber.
Yeah, an echo chamber, exactly. Just me and Erik reflecting our own opinions back at each other. So was there any guy you felt had a season in 2023 that was underrated for actually how well they performed?
Probably Dimitrov. If you just look at how consistently he beat the players he was supposed to beat, how consistently he beat players outside of the top 10, Grigor Dimitrov was an absolute machine. You can count the bad losses that he's had on his season on one hand. And I think when you look at it, especially when you look at the draws he was dealt, there's a good argument to be made that if Dimitrov got a little bit of draw luck at maybe a couple of the majors or some of the Masters 1000s, he would have had a top 10 season. Statistically, even as it is, even with the bad draws that he tended to get throughout the year, he still had his best statistical year since 2018, which is not something that you'd expect out of someone of, Dimitrov's age, north of 30 years old. So I think Grigor Dimitrov is the answer to kind of the under the radar player who really throughout the year was performing noticeably well, noticeably better than he has the last few years.
Yeah. And I think that was also kind of reflected in the UTR came out with a ranking of their top 10 rated players for the season. And Dimitrov was like number 8 on that list because, like you said, he performed well against the guys that he lost to, and he beat all the guys he was expected to beat. So his play level was up there. It just, yeah, sometimes that doesn't always convert to tournament results. Moving on, another guy we talk about a lot though for the 2023 season, or we did talk about, was Felix Auger-Aliassime. We've sometimes been a little harsh on him and his performance throughout this year, and I wanted to hear what your thoughts were about how he performed in 2023 and his struggles and what you kind of expect to see in the coming year.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's a couple aspects to it. One, he had this amazing 2022. The only thing that you would say about it is, everything was kind of indoors. The majority of his success was indoors. Now, I mean, there were some moments outside, right? Like Roland Garros, he pushes Nadal on the clay. So that was one example. And his results at majors, he was on a pretty good run there until the start of this year. But he's always been a player, one, whose confidence can be a little bit fragile. Like when he starts missing, when things start going downhill and he starts to, spiral and get negative, which it's not always very outward when he gets negative, but things can go downhill for him in a big way, especially because he is such an aggressive player. His forehand is a really hot and cold shot. And, he can lose a lot of matches on his forehand just as much as he can win a lot of matches on his forehand. What happened this year, though, there was definitely, some injury stuff, although it's not like Shapovalov, who missed half the year. I mean, Felix only really missed 3 weeks with, I think it was a shoulder injury. Statistically, what happened is his first serve. I mean, he didn't serve well this year. And I think that one thing people maybe don't see about Felix and how he's successful is just how important his first serve is to his game. He's not a guy who's like 6'6" or 6'7", and people look at him as a serve bot, and rightly so. He's not, but at the same time, that is his biggest weapon. That is his best weapon. And if he's going to serve low percentages like he did most of this year, and he's not going to hit nearly as many aces at the frequency that he did in 2022, he's never been a great baseliner. He's never been a top 10 level baseliner ever. So he needs his first serve to make things easy on him, to bail him out of tough situations. And, just assessing his tennis, like a lot of people look at his weaknesses or they hone in on like his backhand. But at the end of the day, I think his strength is what failed him this year, mainly his first serve and at times even his forehand.
Yeah, I mean, that's some great insight. I also think that with the serve, as you said, his confidence probably was wavering a little bit. And I think the serve, obviously, it's a set play shot. It's not like in the middle of a rally where you can maybe kind of get into a flow with it. The serve, you're all in your head before you hit it. So if your confidence is wavering in your serve, that can probably have an impact on how well you hit it and what the percentage looks like for that shot.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, we were kind of talking about that earlier too, Aiden. Having the confidence to be able to serve your way out of predicaments too. If you find yourself down in a game and you have a big serve and you're confident, you're like, oh, I'll just serve my way out. And he just didn't have that anymore.
Yeah, his first serve in percentage for the year was 4 percentage points lower, and his ace rate was about 3 percentage points lower, which they might sound like small numbers, but when we're talking about thousands of serves, that's actually a really big number. It's statistically significant number because, you got to think of it as a range of, I mean, the worst servers might have an ace rate of 2%. The best servers might have an ace rate of 18%. So you think about like what 3% does at this level of the game, it's a massive deal. That said, like if you look at his return game, like the rate at which he broke serve, that was also down big time this year. So a lot of the times, I was watching Felix's matches and, people wanted to ask me like, what's going wrong? What's the issue with Felix? Why isn't he winning? And sometimes the answer was like, everything. Like nothing is going well, right? It's not one thing. It was a surprisingly bad year, even if I didn't necessarily buy into the hype that was building coming into the year based on his indoor hard court results after the U.S. Open, because you always got to be careful with those. A lot of players will tear it up after the U.S. Open indoors, and it doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to have this massive season next year.
Yeah. And I mean, the fact that he was able to come in this year still and win in Basel shows that there's a confidence aspect to it, because he had no momentum going into that tournament really. And then all of a sudden he's able to win a big event that nobody really expected him to. So pretty crazy that it can turn around like that, because I feel like you don't really think of indoors as being that massively different from outdoors just on the surface, because it's still a hard court. But in terms of the mentality and how it feels maybe on the court, it can be a big difference.
It's a big deal for someone like Felix, though, because, he's all about aggressive spot serving and pretty low margin forehand. And again, his intentions and his targets on the forehand are very, very small. I mean, he goes for lines all the time, and sometimes that's to his detriment. But indoors, he's going to land more of those shots. It's just easier to time the ball. You don't have the wind. You don't have those elements that are going to throw off your timing by that fraction of a second. That's going to be the difference for, making your attacking forehand and missing it.
100%. Shifting to two guys that had great 2023s, Sinner and Alcaraz. And as they move into 2024, obviously Alcaraz was a step up on Sinner at the beginning of the year. He returned from injury, and just that first half of the season, or through Wimbledon, really was crazy. I mean, I think, in my opinion, he was probably the player of the year through Wimbledon.
Yep.
Djokovic kind of took that title for me as the season ended up, winning the U.S. Open, Cincinnati, all these tournaments at the end of the year. But in that time that Djokovic kind of took player of the year, Sinner also, it seemed like, took a step up. He won multiple tournaments and beat Medvedev multiple times. So I wanted to hear your idea on who do you think of those two kind of has a better 2024 and ends up higher ranked at the end of this season?
Yeah, I mean, so the trendy answer would be Sinner right now because of everything you just said. I mean, Alcaraz didn't win a title after Wimbledon, and Sinner, my favorite Sinner stat right now is he's won 7 out of his last 8 matches against top 5 players. That's how good he was, in the latter stretch of the year. But, Jannik had more to improve on than Alcaraz. He was behind, and you got to give him so much credit for the work he did physically. His explosiveness is better. His durability is better. He's not getting those small injuries as much as he was last year. He's not looking as worse for wear late in tournaments like he was last year. The volleys are a lot better. Like he volleyed his way to his first win over Daniil Medvedev. I think that was in Beijing. He's added a forehand drop shot. Against Djokovic, I think it's been key that he's kind of learned to move his backhand around a lot more, where it used to be just kind of heavy cross court, very predictable. So he's done a lot of things, and I think he's closed that gap a little bit to Alcaraz. But I still think to say that Sinner's going to have a better 2024 is probably an overreaction, a little bit of recency bias, in my opinion, just because, I mean, Alcaraz, you think about who do you trust at the end of a major right now? The guy who has already closed the deal twice in Alcaraz, 2 major titles already. You know that when he's in a third major final, and look, he's 2-0 in those things, you know that it's not really going to phase him and that he's going to show up and probably be the best version of himself, versus Sinner, who doesn't have really a lot of big wins at slams, period.
Yeah.
He made his first semifinal at Wimbledon. The draw was a dream draw for him. Wasn't able to really challenge Djokovic very well in that semifinal. That's his only major semifinal. So, I'm coming into 2024 thinking I think Jannik is ready to, for the first time, have some big moments at majors, get himself in some big matches, maybe make a major final. But now there's that concern, guy with a history of some nerve management issues. How's he going to handle his first major final? I don't have that concern with Alcaraz. So I still think, Carlitos, especially if he's able to correct some things that we saw in the second half of last year, still think Alcaraz has the better year in 2024.
Yeah, Alcaraz this year made the semifinal of every slam he played in, minimum. And you look at those matches, he was not that far off when he played against Medvedev in the U.S. Open. I think like that match, if he had gotten a few chances and performed a little bit better in a couple of situations, that match could have gone his way. And then you look at the semifinal, the French Open, and he was struggling with some injury and some health issues, it seemed. So it seems like these matches where he was right there. Whereas, like you said, yes, Sinner lost to Zverev in the U.S. Open, who is a guy that, while he had a great year, isn't necessarily a top 4 guy.
Yeah, and that was, that was kind of a tough matchup for Sinner in Zverev before I think he unlocked what he did after the U.S. Open, which was, I trust my volleys. I can come forward. I know when to take some more pace off the ball, focus on angles, and use the drop shot. Like, these are all very important things against Zverev, because Zverev is a great pace absorber, and those are the guys that Sinner has really struggled against. So Djokovic, Medvedev, Zverev, before this last couple months of the year, he's been terrible against all those guys for a reason, because Sinner is kind of, his whole thing was, I'm going to hit the ball so hard that you're not going to really be able to handle it. I'm going to give you too much pace to handle. And for those guys, it's like, nope, I can handle the pace. And then Sinner has no answer. He's just had to develop more well-rounded point construction and offense, which he has. So now he should be able to compete against those guys better. But yeah, I mean, Alcaraz still ahead by a little bit for Jannik. Although Sinner does match up really well against Alcaraz head-to-head. So that works in his favor.
Yeah. Kind of, Sinner has a little bit more to prove, essentially, compared to Alcaraz, who already has proved himself to an extent. But outside of those two guys, is there a player you think in 2024 that is like a guy to watch that you think is going to break out and make a big mark that maybe is under the radar right now? Kind of like how Dimitrov was under the radar this year. Is there a guy that is maybe under the radar now, but you think in 2024 is going to explode onto the scene?
I don't know if there's anyone under the radar, so to speak, but I think the most interesting prospects or the most interesting guys where you kind of ask the question, are they going to make a leap, would be Ben Shelton and Holger Rune. And among those guys, I'm pretty confident in Rune. I think there's too much low-hanging fruit for improvement for Holger. I believe in his desire, his work ethic, and I really believe in his team. He has Severin Luthen now on. He has Boris Becker on. So I can't see things not working out this year for Rune, and I think he's going to start to fulfill his potential more. Because even though, I mean, he had a good year, right? He finished 8th in the world this year. I watch him play, and especially the inconsistencies that we saw after the clay court season. And I think, wow, he could be so much better. His decision-making is not polished. Physically, he seems to have a real stamina issue, which is partially why he has shot selection issues. It seemed like he had drama with his coaching this year, and it seemed like he had injuries. So all of these things go wrong, and you're still 8th in the world. What's going to happen when some of these things inevitably correct themselves? I mean, I think he'll finish top 5, to be frank.
Yeah. Looking at someone like Rublev is a guy that is top 5 right now, but I think Runa's potential, based on what I've seen from Rublev, it seems like Runa's potential is much higher to become a significantly maybe better player. Whereas Rublev, I've called him in the past sort of a gatekeeper to the top 5 because he's really tough to beat for a lot of these guys. But if you can beat him, it seems like you can beat him. He's not a guy that really makes that many of these massive upset wins against guys that are better than him.
Yes, I think that's completely accurate. It's funny, they played at the Australian Open, and it was one of the best matches of the year, honestly. And it was exactly that. Runa, at times, I think Runa was kind of the better player and the more talented player, but emotionally and tactically, he was a total mess. So he lost in a 5th set, and Rublev was the professional on the court and the guy who had the composure, which sometimes you don't say about Rublev. And Holger wasn't. So yeah, again, it's just a maturing process for Runa. He's a better athlete than Rublev. He defends way better than Rublev. His backhand is quite a bit better, I think, than Rublev's as well. He volleys better than Rublev. So yeah, eventually that leapfrog will happen.
Yeah.
Well, you saw that in Monte Carlo too, when, Runa just completely imploded and Rublev ended up taking the title.
True. Yep. Good point.
Speaking on a couple more guys in 2024 that may be winding down their careers, what do you think the 2024 season looks like for Djokovic and Nadal, who obviously is coming back in Brisbane? But these guys are obviously, there's inevitability that time is going to catch up with them at some point. But what do you think the season looks for both of them? And how many more years do you think Djokovic is going to end up playing?
I don't know how many more years, but I'm pretty confident that Djokovic in 2024 gonna be very, very motivated. The body is still in a really good place, it seems, physically, athletically. And I love what he's done with his forehand, making that a much bigger weapon. A lot higher ground stroke speeds from Djokovic, particularly on the forehand side. That's going to help him a lot. I think he wants those Olympics real bad. And even if he doesn't win the Olympic gold medal, I think it's going to fuel the rest of his season, especially the first half of his season. So it's going to treat him well. So, I think Novak's going to continue to be the Novak that we saw last year. It's really going to be up to Alcaraz and Sinner and Medvedev on hard courts, especially, to see what they can do to challenge it. But I don't think we're going to see a drop off for Djokovic. For Nadal, the question is, what's his movement going to be like? Is he going to be able to stay healthy? And that's really the one that we're all, fingers crossed for, because that's the whole point of Nadal coming back to play is he wants to finish his career on the tennis court, not in a press conference. That's what he said. So first of all, you hope that for him. How good can he be if his movement's like 70% of what maybe it was? I don't know that I want to say in his prime, because that's even, he's won plenty of majors without his movement being of the level that it was in his prime. But let's just say 2019 level, first half of 2022 level. If it's a lot lower than that, I still think Nadal can be a borderline top 10 player. Like, the guy's just really, really skilled. He doesn't have the big serve that I think he would need to really compete on the upper echelons of the game if he's not moving well. But just if you look at what his forehand brings to the table and the baseline variety and the court craft and the overall racket skills that he has as a baseliner, he can still be a borderline top 10 player without having to move all that well. So that's kind of my mindset going into Nadal's year. I don't think he can compete. I'm not anticipating that he can contend for majors because I don't think the movement is going to be good enough to do that. I also think that even if his movement isn't good, he's still going to win a whole lot of matches.
Yeah. I mean, it's crazy to think about someone like Nadal and be able to say that he can play at that top 10 level. considering his movement is maybe one of his best things. He's an incredible mover when he was younger. And without that, you'd be like, okay, well, where is he going to be? But yeah, exactly like you were saying, if you look at the rest of his game, you're still like, okay, this guy's an incredible player.
Right. Like compare him to Murray. Murray doesn't have any weapon in the same stratosphere as Nadal's forehand. And that's why when Murray's movement goes, it's like, okay, what are you as a player and how are you going to win? Nadal doesn't have that issue. He has those aggressive tools to kind of overcome any kind of slight decline in movement.
Yeah, and even Murray, without that movement, he's still able to be a top 50, top 40 guy even. So you'd have to think that Nadal is able to compete at an even higher level. But yeah, I know. I mean, speaking on those two guys, though, I know that you have your podcast 3, which is focused on the big 3. These guys are obviously winding down their careers. Do you know where that podcast is going to sort of trend, considering their careers are winding down?
We have some ideas. We're not ready to share them yet,
okay.
But we're going to continue to do the podcast. That's the plan. Right now, we do have Djokovic, we do have Nadal, and potentially his last year. So we're content right now, continuing to be a Big 3 podcast. But you're right, that won't last forever. But we're committed to keeping it going.
Yeah, but speaking on the post Big 3 era, though, I do have a question about what your thoughts are and what the leading guys are going to look like after that era is done. And I was wondering if you think it's going to return to a system where it's sort of like a more balanced distribution of slam winners, where nobody's really favored to win every single slam of the year, or it's going to sort of have another, not necessarily Big 3, but maybe a Big 4, just a small group of guys that are winning everything.
Small group. I think a lot of people have been in some sort of fantasy world about this, where they think like you're going to be world number 9 and you're going to have a great chance to win when like Carlos Alcaraz exists, like I don't see why people don't. These top guys had a pretty dominant year, and that includes Medvedev, and that includes Sinner, and obviously it includes Alcaraz. Outside of Djokovic, they were really, really good. They are really, really good. Medvedev is actually low-key getting up there in age, but Sinner is young, improving. Rune has the talent to be one of those guys. How is Shelton going to develop? And what about some of the guys who are 17 years old right now? And, in 2 years, they're gonna be the brightest prospects in the sport. Like, there's just no evidence that there's going to be some sort of void of top-tier dominant talent in the men's game when Djokovic steps aside. Zero. So yeah, I've rejected that theory for years now. And I'm not sure why people are so convinced that it's going to be open season slams for everybody when Djokovic leaves.
Yeah. And I think, honestly, I don't think there's ever really been a time when it was that wide open. Like, I feel like there's always been top guys that you are expected to really perform the best.
Yeah, I mean, it used to depend on surface more. So in the 90s, like there were a bunch of guys who you just knew weren't going to win in Roland Garros. And that included some of the best in the world. Like you just knew Boris Becker wasn't going to win it. Sampras wasn't going to win it. It was going to be somebody else. And then at Wimbledon, it was like, okay, they are going to win it. So that's how things have changed, right? The game has changed. And now it feels like even less guys can win majors because everyone's playing the same on every surface. So if you're the best on clay, you're probably one of the best on grass, and you're definitely one of the best on hard court.
Yeah.
I got kind of a fun question for you. So first, can you kind of speak about the state of American tennis, and then which American player you think has the best chance to win a slam?
Yeah, I mean, there are just so many guys right now, so many variables in the top 30. It's amazing. And to me, that means the developmental side, they've done their job. I think there was a down period where people were looking at American tennis and, USTA, rightly so, kind of questioning, are we emphasizing the right things in coaching and development? And the answer was probably no. I think this generation, you have to say yes, but you can't teach the kind of talent it takes to actually dominate and win majors. And I think Shelton has it for sure. I think Korda has it maybe, but I'm much less convinced. And I don't think anyone else has it. So a lot of people are very hopeful, maybe very excited about Francis Tiafoe and Tommy Paul and Taylor Fritz. Look, I think they've done an amazing job, but I don't think they're ever going to be top 5. And that's because I literally don't know what they're supposed to do better than they've done. Like Taylor has a great forehand and a great backhand. You can't really hit the ball much better than Taylor, but his touch is really poor and his movement isn't that good. It's like, is Taylor Fritz ever going to move as well as even like Sinner? No. Can he do anything about that? I don't think so. He's just not born with it. Tommy Paul has the opposite problem. He does move as well as Sinner and Alcaraz and Medvedev, but he doesn't have the racket talent that Fritz has. His forehand isn't as good and his backhand isn't as good and his serve isn't as good. And I don't think he can do anything about it. Francis is kind of in between. He's got some funky technique and an interesting play style. And, I think there are limitations on what he can do on the forehand and the backhand. So I think those guys have kind of maxed out, and that doesn't mean that they can't have a year where maybe they finish, they make the year-end championship one year. I think that should be Tommy Paul's goal. I think that should be Francis's goal. Fritz has already done it. I think, Taylor should want to have, more runs at majors. I think that should be his goal. But Korda is a pretty special ball striker. And I think if he can continue to develop his serve, which he started to do this year, I think he can definitely be a top 10 player. With Shelton, you look at a guy who might have at some point the best serve in the world, a dominant serve. And you combine that with the fact that his forehand is a weapon, unlike a lot of these other big servers that we see now, Hurkacz, Medvedev, Zverev, their forehands are not weapons. So Shelton can actually deliver a serve +1 at the level of like a Berrettini, but he's much more athletic than Berrettini, moves much better. That's enticing because that allows him to then also be a pretty good baseliner as well. So I think Shelton is the guy, if all the cards fall correctly in his development. And by the way, I really like his makeup mentally as well. I think Shelton is the best chance that I see right now.
Yeah.
Yeah, cool. I feel like Korda kind of flies under the radar, or at least slips through the cracks because he's not as high ranked as these other guys too.
So he can't stay healthy.
Yeah.
He just can't stay healthy. So that's been the problem for him for 3 years now. And he's trying his best. He's trying to build up his body. He's trying to build muscle. And, now we're going to start to see, okay, you're at the age where you should be pretty much fully developed and you've had the years to put in the work to try to build up your body. Is this an issue where like genetically you're just a little bit brittle, or have you gotten to the place now where you're going to be able to stay healthy?
Yeah. I mean, speaking on Korda, we had a pro player come on, Alafiani. He's been playing in a lot of challengers and futures tournaments, but he played against Korda when he was a junior. And one thing he talked about was like, sometimes Korda just has those moments where he just won't miss shots and he's just spectacular on the court. And there's nothing that it seems like his opponent can do about it. And so if Korda can put that together where he doesn't have any issues where that falls off, he could probably be performing at that level, but it seems like he hasn't been able to consistently perform at that level.
Yeah, I mean, look at what he did in January. He almost beat Djokovic to win Adelaide, and he beat Medvedev at the Australian Open. What ended that Australian Open run? It wasn't him losing a match. It was him injuring his wrist.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, thank you for coming on. We're going to hop into segments now. So, Erik, what's new in tennis? What do you see this week?
Yeah, so Gill actually mentioned it a little earlier, but Rune adds Severin Luthen to his team. He's a former coach of Roger Federer. So he's going to work alongside Boris Becker. I'm not really sure how they'll balance it, but I feel like Team Rune is becoming a powerhouse, and credit to his mom because his mom's his manager as well, and they haven't really had the best, I guess, you know, um, relationship dynamic. Like, remember in Roland Garros, he kicked his mom out of the match. So I feel like she's really putting in effort to try to build up this team, and it makes sense after the season he's had that they're really trying to put more effort into that. So a little background on Luthi. He's Federer's coach from 2007 to 2022. And I like this piece of news because I think it's interesting how each player has their own box dynamic. You have Alcaraz, he has a squad of just fully like committed guys, and then you have some people like Medvedev, who's just, kind of a lone wolf type of vibe where he has one person in his box, and it's usually his coach, sometimes his wife. Then you have like Tommy Paul and Nick Kyrgios who bring a lot of friends in their box, their girlfriends. So it's kind of interesting to see, how you can make up a team and what that comprises of, like trainers, friends,
Yeah.
coaches, girlfriends.
Rune is putting together a super team
Yeah,
here.
super team.
The
I
first
know.
tennis super team. But yeah,
Yeah.
what I saw was this thing about Djokovic. He missed out on a bunch of bonus money because he failed to participate in enough Masters 1000 events this year. And a big part of that was that they didn't allow him to play in the Sunshine Double, obviously because of COVID restrictions. And he maybe could have forced himself to play in Canada or gone all the way to Asia, playing Shanghai, but he didn't end up doing that. And he missed out on probably around $5 million in bonus money because the top guy in terms of bonus money was Alcaraz, and he made 4.4 million. And you would kind of assume that Djokovic would be at least in that range. So it's crazy because he was still the top earner for the ATP. But even then, I know he doesn't necessarily need that money, but it's still a ton of money to not get for a situation that wasn't, it was borderline out of his control, depending on how you view that whole situation. But it seems like a little bit of definitely an unfortunate situation for him.
Yeah, I don't like that. I think just principle wise, the ATP kind of did him dirty.
The ATP, I think it's out of their hands, right? Like when you make a policy, that's the policy, and it's really the U.S. government regulations that I think you have. At that point, I think everybody, like left, right, center, everybody agreed it was outdated and just needed to get updated, which it did like the next month.
Yeah.
So I think I don't know that the ATP could have done anything. How much did you say it was? 3 million?
Alcaraz made 4.4 million. So I'm assuming that Djokovic would be around there and would have been close to maybe like 5 million in bonus money. He made 15 million in the year. So it would have
Prize
been
money.
maybe in prize money for, I think, from the ATP. And the bonus would have been, I guess, like, what is that, 20% of it?
True. Probably made double that, maybe close to 30 million. And I'm guessing, I haven't looked at the number in a while, in endorsements.
Hmm.
So that's a bigger part. Like players, he definitely doesn't want to lose 4 million for no reason. But if you look at kind of what he makes for the year and try to calculate, well, how meaningful is that to him? I think you throw in the endorsement money, and it's a lot more palatable, stomachable.
Yeah,
Hmm.
that's true.
That's
That's
true.
true. It's just one of those things where it's like you look at it, and even though it's not necessarily the biggest percentage of his income, it's still like, okay, that's 5 million or $4 million that he's not getting.
Yeah, at least it was able to be spread around with other players too,
Yeah,
who maybe
exactly.
could have
Someone
used it
else
more.
was in the top 30 because he
Hmm.
wasn't in it. So someone was happy.
Yeah.
We would get into bet of the week now, obviously, but no real bets this week. Maybe next week though, because the United Cup is coming up. So maybe we'll get into a bet then, but none for this week. So that means match of the week. Last week I talked about maybe we would do something different because there weren't any ATV matches that last week. So this week we're going to be talking about some of our favorite historical matches. So Eric, do you want to get into yours first?
Yeah, definitely. I'll do it. So I'm choosing the Nadal Federer 2009 Australian Open final, just kind of as a little paying homage to Nadal coming back. Hopefully, gonna have a great year. And let's see. So I'm gonna get pretty detailed with this. I was watching the highlights this morning. It was just incredible. So a little background information. This was Nadal's first hardcourt final, while it was Federer's ninth, and he hadn't lost one yet. And then you had the stare down in the beginning, they're face to face across the net. There's this great camera angle where it zoomed in, like slow motion shot of Nadal just jumping up and down. You know how he does. I think it's like an intimidation factor, but long hair just kind of gracefully flopping everywhere. And then Federer just sat there so composed, smirking, looking nice and calm as he tends to do. So the first set, Federer actually had a break point. He actually teed up on a Nadal serve, made it 4-2, and you kind of thought from that point on, all right, Federer's got the first set, but Nadal immediately broke back and ended up breaking again at 5-5, went on to take the first set 7-5. We had amazing long rallies. Federer's inside out forehand that tends to go up the line too, that kind of curves back in. Love seeing that. So the second set, Federer was not messing around there. He took it 6-3 pretty easily. And then in the third, there was this insane rally where Nadal had two overheads that should have been put away, but then somehow Federer got them back, brought the point back to neutral, and even had a chance to win the point, but unfortunately put it into the net, and Nadal ended up winning the third set in a tiebreaker off a Federer double fault. So kind of heartbreaking. Federer came back, won the fourth set, but then the fifth was completely controlled by Nadal, cruised through, won the fifth, took it 6-2, and won his first Australian Open final.
That's quite the match there. I wonder what the storyline was like in going into this match, because obviously I wasn't really that locked in on it when I was 8 years old in 2009. But when you look at that match, obviously 2008 Wimbledon is considered one of like the best matches of all time. And then Federer wins the US Open that year. And then you go into this match, and I wonder if there was a thought like, after Nadal wins this hard court final, is he going to sort of take over and be that guy that's like, oh, this guy is the new king and he's going to win everything now? Because obviously Federer had been that guy, and now he's lost in 2 straight finals to Nadal, both times he played him. So I wonder what the situation was like there in that after that match.
Yeah, definitely. What about you? What is your match?
My match is my favorite match of all time is the Federer versus Nadal, another Australian Open final between them, 2017. Gill, and you brought this one up earlier, but I just remember the storyline in that match because both were coming back from injuries, so they'd been off for a while, and they came in as the 17th seed for Federer and the 9 seed for Nadal. And so you're looking at this match and you're like, okay, how are these guys going to do coming back from an injury? You had Djokovic go out in round 2 to Dennis Istomin, obviously a massive upset. Murray lost, I want to say, in the quarterfinals or something like that. And so these guys are all of a sudden the last of the big four that are left, and they make the final. And it was just weird seeing that 17-9 instead of like a 1 and a 3 on the seeds there. But Federer obviously hadn't won a slam since 2012 Wimbledon, and Nadal's last one was the 2014 French. So to an extent, it seemed like they were past their prime, maybe weren't going to play in a final after 2015 and 16. They hadn't won one, and now it was going to be a massive comeback for either player, probably bigger for Federer, but still big for either guy. And it was just a really tight match, back and forth, a ton of momentum swings, and they got to a fifth set, and Nadal went up a break early in the fifth, and then Federer battled back and ended up taking the match. I just remember this match because Pacific time, it started at 12:30 in the morning, so like just past midnight. And I stayed up till 4 a.m. watching it, and it was so intense. And I was just like sweating, just like I was rooting for Federer. So obviously for me, it was a great result. Not the great result for Nadal fans, but it was just an exciting match to watch.
Yeah, I like how you brought up the 17 versus 9 seeds, because in the match in 2009 that I just talked about, it was 1 and 2. So like pretty funny.
Yeah, crazy how 8 years
I
later
know.
guys are still playing in the same Grand Slam final. Anyway, that was an incredible episode. Thank you for coming on, Gill. We'd love to have you back in the future if you're ever interested. And yeah, thanks for coming on.
Yeah, Gil, thanks. And why don't you tell people where they can find you on social media?
You can find me on the Gill Gross YouTube channel at Gill_Gross on Twitter/X. Instagram is in the future. We're gonna launch that pretty soon. We've been ignoring that for a while. Also on TikTok, Gill Gross Analysis. Newsletter coming soon as well. So exciting stuff on the horizon. Thank you guys for having me. This was really fun. Aidan and Erik, and keep up the good work.
Thanks.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
All right, and that's the show. If you're not already subscribed, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. You can find us on Instagram, TikTok, YouTube at Painting Lines Podcast. Feel free to shoot us a DM or email us any questions or thoughts at paintinglinespodcast@gmail.com.